Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we take the crucial research, the detailed articles, and the core insights from experts, and really distill them into knowledge you can actually use.
We really get that you, our listener, are already incredibly well informed. You know the strategies, you understand the theories, but, well, often the most persistent challenge isn't learning what to do.
Right.
It's figuring out how to consistently, automatically, and just relentlessly do it.
Absolutely. Today, we are undertaking a really deep dive into that invisible canyon that just seems to swallow our best intentions. We're talking about the gap between knowing and executing.
Mm-hmm.
Our focus is the mechanics of movement and how to overcome that inertia that plagues, even the most capable people. We're calling this whole stack of material the law's action.
And our mission today is, well, it's simple, but it's really powerful. We're trying to extract the exact gears and levers you need to bridge that gap. We're looking beyond, temporary motivation or hype.
Yeah, the quick fixes.
The quick fixes. We want to install strategies that make forward motion the default setting in your life and work. We want to understand not just what action is, but, how it works as a system.
And the beauty of this research, I think, is that it comes from a place of just radical honesty. The author, Prabadevi Venkatesan, she frames this entire approach not as some guru selling perfection,
No.
but as a recovering overthinker who struggled mightily with this exact issue.
And that confession is so vital, it makes all the insights instantly credible. She shares this incredible and frankly pretty embarrassing anecdote. For 3 years, she struggled to write a book.
3 years.
3 years. And the whole time she was just continuously polishing the outline. She even purchased a professional hardcover binding for the outline.
No way.
Yeah, keeping this empty, this dummy book, she calls it, on her desk as a physical reminder.
Oh, wow. The performance of productivity is just so seductive, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's the intellectual equivalent of, like, arranging your gym clothes perfectly without ever stepping outside the door.
That's it, exactly.
You look prepared, but you've accomplished zero actual motion.
Precisely. And the inertia finally broke not through some heroic act of willpower, but from a jolt of external reality. Her 5-year-old nephew picked up this weighty, professionally bound dummy book and asked, just so innocently.
Oh, I can feel the cringe coming.
He says, "Auntie, why does this have hundreds of sticky notes and no pages inside?" And that moment of shame delivered by a small child, that was the catalyst. It forced her to stop strategizing and start studying the actual mechanics of action.
That's the ultimate aha moment right there. So, okay, based on her research and that whole journey, she identified 5 central pillars that define this law of action. What are those 5 core ideas that are going to guide our conversation today?
Right, so we can organize them into 5 foundational concepts that we're going to explore pretty thoroughly. First, you have the action gap, which explains that, separation between intellectual knowledge and actual behavioral change. Second, your brain's built-in brakes, which is a deep dive into the neuroscience of why we resist change. It's fascinating stuff. Third, the myth of perfect timing.
Oh, that's a big one.
It's a huge one. It exposes the lie that you need total readiness before starting. Fourth is momentum, so the reliable physics of sustained motion. And finally, imperfect action, which is the core truth that you have to start before you feel ready.
Okay, let's unpack that first concept then.
Yeah.
The action gap. So, if we are highly educated, if we consume knowledge intentionally, why does that knowledge so often fail to translate into tangible execution?
Right.
Why is being smart such a poor predictor of, real-world success?
Well, the problem is really one of domains. Knowledge lives, for the most part, in the cerebral cortex. That's the rational advanced planning center of your brain.
The CEO.
The CEO, exactly. But action, especially when it involves risk or something new, that's often dictated by much older, deeper emotional and primitive systems. The author describes the action gap as an invisible canyon. You can sit on the edge of that canyon and read 10,000 books on how to cross it. But all that intellectual prep, it doesn't build the physical bridge for you.
And this brings us right to a deeply, counterintuitive idea, the intelligence paradox. We assume that having more analytical horsepower just accelerates execution, but this research suggests that for a lot of people, it actually becomes the primary source of paralysis. How does being smart slow you down?
What's so fascinating here is the power of mental simulation. Highly analytical minds, they are masters of scenario planning. They don't just see the potential for success.
No, they see all the failures.
They excel at picturing every single conceivable failure mode. The catastrophic outcomes, the public mockery, the legal hurdles, the financial ruin. They can run a 5-minute simulation of failure that is so vivid, their brain reacts to it as if it's a real, immediate, physical threat.
So they're basically using their superior processing power to terrify themselves into staying put. They run the failure script, and their internal alarm system, the amygdala, it triggers fight or flight, even though they're just sitting safely at a desk.
That is exactly right. And there's a devastating secondary effect here, which is the intellectual identity threat. So if you've built your self-concept around being the smartest person in the room or the strategic thinker or the one who always has the perfect plan, the prospect of a messy public failure isn't just an operational risk, it's an existential one.
So it's better to just postpone action indefinitely and preserve the reputation of having this perfect, unexecuted plan. That way, the potential for a flaw just never sees the light of day.
Yes, the mental narrative becomes, oh, I didn't fail, I simply haven't launched yet because the conditions weren't optimal. And that strategy keeps the SMART label totally intact, but it guarantees stagnation. It's a very high-level, very sophisticated form of self-sabotage.
And when we avoid that hard, real-world action, we fall into the trap of what she calls productivity cosplay. This is where we wear the costume of industry, we look super busy, but we're avoiding the actual work that moves the needle. So why does planning feel so incredibly productive?
Planning is this brilliant psychological master trick. When you visualize success, when you create that color-coded spreadsheet or polish the mission statement, your brain experiences a tiny but guaranteed dopamine reward. Studies confirm that visualizing an outcome, it activates many of the same reward pathways as actually achieving it.
So we get a quick, cheap hit of accomplishment without paying the execution cost.
Yeah.
It is brilliant.
It's brilliantly counterproductive if the brain chooses that micro reward over the uncertain, delayed, and, effortful reward of execution. The brain is always optimizing for reward efficiency. Why face the risk of a real failure when you can guarantee a micro win by designing a new workflow in Notion?
I think we all have a version of that 6-week editorial calendar story.
Yeah.
The author spent 6 weeks perfecting a schedule for a blog that didn't even exist.
Right.
6 weeks of font selection, category arrangement, keyword optimization, all this high-level strategy for 0 words written.
It illustrates the point perfectly. That planning, it wasn't preparation, it was tranquilizing her anxiety. It was using busyness as a release valve for the fear of the blank page. The energy spent on optimizing the process was vastly greater than the energy required to just write 3 paragraphs.
Yeah.
Productivity cosplay is all about surrounding yourself with the tools and the trappings, the fancy apps, the expensive notebooks, the perfectly curated desk to avoid the actual uncomfortable labor. It makes us feel industrious, but it's really just a shell game.
This all sounds like a psychological problem, but the research suggests it's deeply biological. We need to look at the biology of breaks. We're trying to navigate this modern professional life with a nervous system that's optimized for, 50,000-year-old survival problems?
That is the evolutionary paradox. We have this constant mismatch. Our nervous system's primary job is keeping us alive, not helping us launch a side business. To understand resistance, we have to listen in on the constant negotiation between the prefrontal cortex, the PFC.
The CEO again.
Yeah. The rational long-term planner, yes. And the amygdala, which is the security guard, the instantaneous threat detection system.
And who's faster?
The amygdala, every single time. It processes emotional and threat data microseconds faster than the PFC can process nuance. Any departure from your routine, any novelty, it registers as a potential threat. If you try to switch careers or start a demanding project, the amygdala sees change, and change once meant leaving the safety of the cave and facing a saber-toothed tiger.
So if I sit down to do deep work on a new high-stakes project and I suddenly feel this urge to check email or reorganize my bookmarks, that's the amygdala winning the argument.
Precisely. It triggers the stress cascade, your heart rate increases, your palms sweat, and, crucially, the body physically reroutes blood flow away from the prefrontal cortex and towards the large muscles, preparing you to flee or fight. You literally cannot think your way out of that feeling of panic because the biological resources for rational, nuanced thought have been redirected. Your body has defaulted to survival mode.
That makes the term comfort zone completely misleading. As the research material highlights, it's not about genuine comfort. It's about something much more primitive.
It's about familiarity. That's the key word.
Yeah.
The limbic system prizes familiarity above all else. Its resistance walls are, they feel like velvet, but they are absolutely restrictive. The research uses the example of Maya, the graphic designer. She loved doodling new characters in her sketchbook that was familiar and safe.
Right.
But the moment she prepared to pitch publishers, she felt this inexplicable exhaustion, this heavy paralysis. Her procrastination wasn't laziness. It was a strong, stubborn fear signal from her limbic system, resisting the novelty of external judgment.
And adding to this biological drag is the brain's constant effort to conserve energy.
Oh, the brain is notoriously metabolically expensive. It consumes around 20% of your resting energy budget, so it is hardwired for glucose conservation. Complex, deliberate planning, like starting a business plan from scratch, that's metabolically costly. Routines and habits, however, they run on well-worn neural grooves, practically on autopilot. They burn minimal calories.
So the brain isn't necessarily lazy, it's just efficiently pushing us toward the path of least cognitive resistance. The known loop, the habitual scroll, the comforting routine.
Exactly. The law of action is asking you to make a deliberate, expensive choice to burn precious glucose on behalf of a goal that has an uncertain payoff far in the future. We have to acknowledge that inertia isn't a moral failing. It's a feature of a highly efficient ancient nervous system.
And that leads us to the ultimate high-status camouflage for fear. Perfectionism. We often hear it praised, but the research suggests it's just resistance wearing a very expensive outfit.
It is resistance dressed up as quality control. Perfectionism is correlated with elevated activity in the anterior cingulate cortex. That's the region responsible for error detection. When that error detector is running on hyper alert, every single task, no matter how small, appears riddled with potential mistakes, flaws, and reasons for criticism.
So the result is a freeze state because the goal has shifted from excellence to avoidance. The only way to guarantee you won't make a mistake is to never start.
That is the core tragedy of it. Perfectionists are not pursuing excellence. They are avoiding the perceived threat of criticism or public failure. They delay until the execution is theoretically flawless, which is, of course, a moving target. The only antidote is forced iteration, which we'll get into later.
The final nail in this inertia coffin is the myth of perfect timing, what the sources call the mirage of someday. This is the lie we tell ourselves to justify our current stasis.
Someday is the intersection of total readiness and zero risk, and those coordinates simply do not exist on the map of reality. It's an imaginary finish line. You can wait for the market to be perfect, for your skills to be absolutely flawless, for the ideal weather, or for the planets to align.
Yeah, good luck with that.
But that day will never ever arrive. The environment is inherently unstable.
The story about Evan, the photographer, just perfectly encapsulates this. He was incredibly talented, but he waited a full year for his portfolio to be absolutely professional before showing it to anyone.
He was waiting for his internal critic to finally approve the launch. Meanwhile, a handful of less skilled, less technically perfect photographers launched their services, got clients, and started building real-world experience. And the tragic irony is that those early movers eventually had so much client work that they hired Evan as an assistant to handle their overflow.
Oh, that hurts. His wait for perfection cost him his own launch trajectory.
And that distinction, when does preparation stop being prudence and become procrastination, that is absolutely vital.
It's using the checklist to avoid taking the flight.
Exactly. Think about Jessica, the linguistics prodigy who's mentioned in Imperial. She wanted to write a definitive textbook. She spent 4 solid years gathering data, accumulating notes, refining methodologies, but she was frozen. Her fortress of preparation was actually a shield, protecting her from the one thing she feared most: exposure.
Peer review.
Peer review and the possibility that she might have missed something.
She thought more data would make her immune to criticism.
It never does. The variables shift the moment you step into the arena. Waiting for the ideal timing actively destroys it because momentum is a variable itself. The window of opportunity doesn't wait for your internal readiness.
And this delay has a quantifiable, a real financial cost. It's not just some philosophical loss.
The compounding cost of delay is staggering. The research included this fascinating calculation on solopreneurs and small business owners. They estimated that the average difference in lifetime earnings between those who launched within 6 months of the idea versus those who waited 2 years.
What was it?
It was 3 to 5 times more for the early movers.
3 to 5 times. That's not a marginal difference. That's generational wealth being forfeited simply due to inertia.
And that gap isn't because the early movers had a superior idea. It's because they started the clock earlier, allowing for more real-world iteration, market feedback, and the accumulation of compounding benefits. Delay is the most expensive invoice you will ever receive, and it's paid in unrealized potential.
Wow.
We are left with this haunting image, that elderly stranger the author met, carrying a worn leather briefcase full of hundreds of yellowing sketches and handwritten notes. 40 years worth of brilliant inventions he never built because he thought he had more time.
That is a chilling mental picture. It connects that action gap directly to a life of regret.
That briefcase is the physical manifestation of the cost of perfection. It serves as this stark reminder. The time you spend waiting for perfect conditions is time stolen from living.
Okay, so if part one was the diagnosis identifying all this neurological and psychological inertia, part two is the radical tactical treatment. We have to completely flip the script on what action looks like. And that starts with the core principle, the power of imperfect action.
Imperfect action beats flawless inaction every single time. This is non-negotiable. You can only convert that theoretical currency in your head into real-world legal tender by executing and executing messily. You only discover what you are truly capable of when you move forward under less than ideal skies.
The author's own experience training for a marathon is a perfect illustration of this. She had the spreadsheets, a perfect training schedule, the specific gear, or, the drill.
The cosplay.
The cosplay. But then life intervened with an ankle injury and a truly miserable forecast for race day. We're talking torrential rain and high winds.
She was tempted to wait for next year, right? For the perfect run. But she showed up. She ran the race drenched, limping through the last 6 miles, but she finished triumphant. And she reflects that a sanitized victory on a sunny day would have produced a temporary high.
Right.
But the messy reality of that rainy, painful finish forged a deeper, permanent confidence in her persistence. Imperfection is not a hurdle. It is the necessary crucible for forging confidence.
And this belief relies on a fundamental shift in perspective. Action creates clarity, not the other way around. We spend so much time waiting for the fog to lift, but the fog only lifts as we move through it.
It's a classic cognitive trap. We assume clarity is a prerequisite for movement. It's not. Clarity is the result of movement. Expecting perfect foresight is like demanding that the fog evaporates completely before you'll drive your car. No, you drive 30 yards at a time, relying on your headlights to reveal the next segment of the road.
We see this powerful contrast between the two case studies, Vikas and Leah. Vikas, the engineer, spent 2 years polishing his pitch deck.
Immaculate slides, perfect typography.
Exactly. But he never built a prototype or spoke to a single customer.
He was waiting for total clarity on the market and the product. Meanwhile, Leah, a schoolteacher with 0 business training, decided to launch a simple online tutoring course. She propped her phone against a stack of cookbooks in her kitchen and filmed a 10-minute video explaining a complicated math concept to a group of 12 parents she already knew.
Her approach was inherently messy. Her lighting was bad, the audio was rough, but she acted.
And that action created immediate, high-quality clarity. The parents who watched that terrible 10-minute video didn't care about the production quality. They were begging for more specialized content. That feedback instantly reshaped her product in real time. She learned more in 1 week of interaction than Vikas learned in 2 years of planning.
And the outcome.
Within 6 months, she replaced her teaching salary with course revenue.
Wow. Leah assumed she had to act to gain clarity, while Vikas assumed he needed clarity to act. That is the entire dichotomy right there.
And that leads to the conclusion that we must embrace the experimental mindset. Micro-experiments. These are limited, low-risk moves with fast feedback loops. They aren't meant to be perfect. They are meant to be questions that you pose to reality.
The research brings up the Pixar example, which is phenomenal. When they developed Inside Out, they didn't start with the final polished story.
Not at all. They started with rapid-fire storyboards and testing. Initially, the filmmakers focused on the emotional dynamic of the character Joy acting opposite fear. They assumed that was the core conflict.
And it wasn't.
No. Months of iteration, testing, and these micro-experiments revealed that the true, compelling emotional dynamic was joy and sadness. No amount of pre-production brainstorming would have unearthed that specific pairing. Only the act of testing and iterating pointed them toward the necessary clarity.
This brings us to the tactical core of the law of action, the first step formula. This is designed to be a direct, practical amygdala hackaway to bypass the primitive brain's fear of large, unknown projects by focusing exclusively on tiny, concrete behaviors.
This formula is crucial because it gives the rational mind ammunition to override that security guard. A legitimate first step must meet three essential criteria, and we have to be rigorous about these. First, it must be executable in the next 30 minutes without needing external permission.
No waiting for anyone else.
No waiting for a boss, a bank, a partner. Second, it must have a clear finish line so you know exactly when you've crossed it, no ambiguity. And third, it must create evidence that the project has moved from concept to reality.
Okay, let's walk through the 5 steps of the formula. Using the running case study of Jessica, the engineer we mentioned earlier, who wanted to quit her high-stress job and start a bakery, her goal feels massive and terrifying.
Exactly. Her goal is quitting her job and securing a $150,000 loan to open a retail space. That is a 5-alarm fire for the amygdala.
Okay, step 1. Slice until it's stupid. How do we apply this to Jessica?
So the psychological strategy here is to carve the project into a chunk so small that your threat detector barely even registers it. We want zero grandeur. If her goal is the bakery, the stupid small slice is not writing a business plan, it's not researching commercial kitchen leases.
What is it then?
The slice, in her case, was simply baking 1 loaf of almond flour bread using her roommate's existing oven and giving it to her next-door neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, for honest feedback.
That is stupidly small. It takes, what, 30 minutes of actual labor and $0 of capital?
The goal isn't quality. The goal is undeniable proof of movement. There's another example, Marcus, the orthopedic surgeon. He wanted a YouTube channel to educate patients. His stupid slice was recording a 9-second video on his phone explaining, here is why your ankle is swollen. He didn't wait for a lighting kit or a fancy intro. He generated 9 seconds of raw data.
Oh, yeah.
The smaller the slice, the lower the psychological friction.
Okay, so step 2. Time box the terror. We are committing to a duration we cannot argue with.
Humans handle discomfort much better when it is bounded by a clear temporal landmark. You commit to 10, 20, or 30 minutes, and during that window, you do nothing but the slice. For Jessica, after deciding on the almond bread slice, she committed 25 minutes to kneading the dough and shaping the loaf. If the 25 minutes felt awful, she was guaranteed to be able to stop.
The beauty of time boxing is that it converts an amorphous emotional hurricane of dread into a simple administrative task.
Absolutely. Think of Priya, the executive who dreaded drafting a termination email. It was an emotional nightmare for her. She time-boxed it. 10 minutes maximum, dedicated only to the first 3 sentences. The discomfort was endurable because it had a clear expiry date. She reduced a massive emotional burden to a simple, bounded writing exercise. The fear of starting is always worse than the reality of the work.
Step 3. Public commitment, private control. How do we leverage that social gravity without giving up autonomy?
We use accountability to create a little positive friction. You announce an immediate, measurable action to at least one other human being. For Jessica, she might text a trusted friend. I will send you a picture of Mrs. Rodriguez holding the finished loaf of bread by 7 p.m. tonight. The friend doesn't judge the quality, only the completion.
That clear metric, the picture by 7 p.m., is non-negotiable, and it leverages our deep-seated desire not to lose face.
And crucially, the private control part means they don't get editorial rights. They are not allowed to criticize the recipe or the neighbor's reaction. They simply confirm that the action took place. Jamal, the teacher, he committed to running 1 mile, and his measurable commitment was sending a sweaty selfie to a group chat every time he completed it.
Of that.
It was playful, immediate, and very effective social leverage.
Okay, step 4. Celebrate the chemistry. This is often the step people skip, but you argue it's essential for rewiring the brain.
It is the most critical step for cementing that action-reward loop. Celebration is not optional frosting. It's the neurochemical lever that reinforces the behavior. It must be immediate, visceral, and self-generated. It can be something as simple as standing up, stretching dramatically, giving yourself a physical high five, or playing 60 seconds of your favorite song really loud.
And the celebration is not contingent on the quality of the work.
Absolutely not. You celebrate the completion of the 25-minute slicing period or the sending of the 9-second video, regardless of whether it was brilliant or terrible. The true triumph is the erosion of inertia, the completion of the action cycle. We are teaching the brain that moving feels good. Excellence grows later. First, we must reward the act of starting.
Finally, step 5. Close the loop with reflection. We convert the short-term visceral experience into long-term learning.
You must dedicate 60 seconds right after the celebration to ask 3 specific questions. What did I notice? What surprised me? And what is the smallest next move? This micro debrief cements the learning, and crucially, it sets the next slice. For Jessica, she noticed that Mrs. Rodriguez asked if she sold them. That surprised her because she assumed the bread was terrible.
And her next move?
Her smallest next move was not find a retail space, but bake 5 more loaves and ask 5 different neighbors for their honest opinion.
So that single loaf, the ridiculously small slice, ignited a massive chain reaction. She traded the terrifying high-stakes $150,000 loan for a borrowed oven and 5 neighbors' opinions.
And those 5 loaves led to her realizing there was demand. That led to her selling 10 loaves every Sunday from her apartment. That scaled to renting time in a local church kitchen for larger batches, and eventually to a full-time business. She bypassed years of planning by simply acting, observing, and refining. The courage of beginning badly was her greatest financial and emotional asset.
The first step formula gets us across the gap. But for sustained success, that single spark needs to turn into a predictable, steady roar. That brings us to momentum, the compound interest of action.
We have to move beyond these episodic bursts of motivation to the reliable physics of motion. The initial force required to start something, to push that huge stalled object, is exponentially greater than the force required to keep it moving.
The old pickup truck analogy.
Exactly. Once the object is gliding, a tiny extra push maintains its velocity. That is the definition of momentum.
So momentum means you stop treating every day like a heroic beginning and start treating it as the effortless continuation of a force already in motion. Why is momentum so predictable? Is it not just some mystical lucky streak?
No, because 3 biological and psychological forces make it inevitable once it's initiated. First, repetition carves neural grooves. Every time you repeat an action, your brain actually speeds up the electrical signals by laying down myelin. It's a fatty insulating sheath around the firing neurons. So what was once deliberate, metabolically expensive effort becomes faster, more automatic, and less cognitively demanding.
So the more we do it, the easier it gets, literally at a cellular level.
Literally. Second, progress delivers dopamine. Every completed slice, every small step forward provides that neurochemical surge. This creates a powerful positive feedback loop. Action leads to pleasure, which fuels more action. You become addicted to your own progress.
And the third force, that reinforces the identity shift we talked about earlier.
It does. Results breed external validation and identity fuel. Those early wins, even the tiny ones, start generating external encouragement, a compliment, a successful sale, a small piece of external data. This reinforces your internal identity as someone who does, not someone who wants. Once your identity shifts to, I am a person who builds, inertia starts working for you, not against you.
This means momentum doesn't judge the size of the win. It just magnifies whatever you feed it. That's the small win snowball.
Consistency matters infinitely more than height or intensity. A small, repeated effort generates compound interest. The danger lies in stopping. If you pause long enough, friction takes over. Restarting requires overcoming inertia all over again, which is why the research is clear. A single skipped day weakens the myelin sheath, and by day 3 of inaction, the amygdala has fully convinced you that the project is dangerous again.
So if consistency is the key, how small is small enough to guarantee that consistency, but still big enough to matter? We need a quantitative solution, and that brings us to the 2% rule.
2% strikes the perfect operational balance. It's mathematically insignificant enough to sidestep the limbic system's fear circuits, but cumulatively powerful enough to drive radical change.
Let's explain the math because it is astonishing.
Okay, so if you improve by just 1% every day, you end the year 37 times better than when you started, which is amazing. But the 2% rule pushes us even further. Compounding at 2% daily for a year multiplies your starting point by nearly 40 times.
Wow.
If you start by writing 2 sentences today, in a year you could be drafting an entire chapter in the same amount of time. The power isn't in the initial effort, it hides in the exponent of consistency.
And psychologically, the brain rarely bothers to hit the brakes on a 2% effort. It registers as trivial.
It is the ultimate amygdala sleeper agent. It teaches the brain, through painless repetition, that showing up is safe and pleasurable. The implementation is key, though. You have to anchor the 2% action to an existing routine.
We call this habit piggybacking. Use the structure you already have.
Exactly. If you already brew coffee at 7 a.m., that is your anchor. Your 2% action is studying 2 new words of a foreign language while the water is boiling. The existing habit, the coffee brewing, acts as the infallible trigger. We see this powerfully demonstrated in the case of Chris, the young father. He was determined to finish his degree while working full-time and raising twins. He just could not carve out 3-hour blocks of time.
So what was his 2%?
15 extra minutes of coursework a day. He anchored it to his existing routines. 5 minutes while waiting for the train, 7 minutes during his lunch break, and 3 minutes right before he clocked out. These were small, trivial slivers of time that required no new willpower. He graduated with honors, propelled entirely by compounding 15-minute slivers. That's the 2% rule in action.
Okay, so we have the action, the first step formula, and the consistency, the 2% rule. Now we need a reliable structure to manage and automate this motion, moving beyond spontaneous motivation to a reliable mechanism, building your action operating system, or AOS.
Willpower is finite. Systems are infinite. Systems trump willpower because they automate decisions and dramatically reduce friction. The AOS is not just a to-do list, it's a layered framework.
What are those layers?
The first is the identity layer, which dictates who you are. You don't say, I want to write a novel. You declare, I am a writer who shows up daily. The second is the workflows layer, which are the chained habits trigger, action, completion that ensure seamless transitions between tasks. And the third is the environment layer.
The physical setup.
Your physical and digital context that is defaulted toward action-removing screens, setting out the necessary tools, reducing points of resistance.
And the tools, the apps, the software, they fall into that environment layer, right? They're supposed to be amplifiers, not crutches.
That is a crucial distinction. Don't let tools become the focus of your productivity cosplay. They should only be used to reduce friction, not to help you avoid discomfort. The most important function of the AOS is automating decision-making using rule sets.
Can you give me an example of a rule set?
Sure. A rule set dictates action when you are tired or overwhelmed. Instead of facing a long list of tasks and burning creative energy deciding what to do, you implement a rule like, I will tackle whichever task moves revenue closest first, regardless of difficulty. Or, if I have less than 15 minutes, I will only answer emails. By deciding beforehand, you preserve your creative energy for solving hard problems, rather than spending it on administrative ones.
The AOS provides the engine, but we still need a steering wheel. That brings us back to the importance of the feedback loop. Action creates clarity, revisited.
The loop ensures that your motion has meaning. The sequence is critical. Action, the spark, leads to data, sensory, emotional, quantitative input, which leads to reflection, structured inquiry, not rumination, which leads to adjustment, the courage to iterate. You must treat all action as an experiment designed to generate high-quality data.
And the research highlights the necessity of the second glance.
Yes. This is how you suspend emotion to gain clarity. You look at the data once with emotion. How does that first draft or that initial client feedback feel? Then you take a breath and look again, as if the result belonged to a stranger. This brief suspension of ego allows you to analyze the result impartially and extract the actionable truth, rather than spiraling into self-criticism.
The case study of Lucia and Mark's Cafe during the lockdown shows how rapid looping saved their business.
They pivoted immediately to launching a care box for delivery. Their initial launch included a small Zoom call component where they would host a virtual coffee break with the purchasers. The data they got immediately was that the calls were awkward, forced, and distracting.
The Zoom call was the flawed slice.
Exactly. Reflection showed that the idea of connection was good, but the execution was bad data, so the adjustment was rapid. They removed the call and instead added a carefully curated Spotify playlist that matched the cafe's atmosphere. The care boxes started flying off the shelves because they acted, observed the data, and adjusted quickly. They didn't sink 6 months of capital into a flawed concept because they embraced the feedback loop.
Now, we've demonstrated this on a personal and small business level. How do we scale these personal micro-victories to lift professional boulders, to apply them in a corporate environment?
The same muscles you flex at home can lift boulders at work because personal habits are prototypes. The process you use to ensure you don't forget your wallet and keys every morning, your personal pre-flight checklist, your resource allocation, that's the skeleton of an organizational quality assurance protocol or an employee onboarding process. The structure of a successful habit is universal.
Tell us about Maya, the civil engineer, and how her tiny personal habit scaled into a massive professional tool.
Maya was overwhelmed managing multiple subcontractors on a multi-million-dollar site. She had personally adopted the habit of using a single folded pocket paper every morning. On one side, she wrote 3 essential tasks. On the other, one courage challenge, like making an uncomfortable call. She noticed the clarity this simple physical system provided.
And she scaled this.
She scaled the process, not the paper. She implemented a mandatory site-wide morning huddle where every supervisor was required to articulate their 3 essential tasks and 1 potential friction point. Her courage challenge. This radically improved communication, saved months in scheduling delays, and ultimately saved the company millions by closing communication gaps and ensuring supplier deadlines were met.
Wow.
Scaling, fundamentally, is moving from leveraging your energy to leveraging other people's skills, capital, and technology. But the engine, start, observe, refine, remains the same.
And scaling is never a straight upward climb. It sounds more like a spiral.
It is the spiral staircase model. As you grow, you will revisit familiar obstacles, budget shortfalls, team friction, fear of exposure, but you do so from a new altitude, with more resources and better perspective. The process you learn with your 2% action is the same process you use when you launch a $100 million venture. The radius expands, but the core mechanism remains start, observe, refine.
Which brings us to the final transformation, living the law of action, making it a true default mode.
This is the ultimate identity shift. Action is no longer a painful, calculated decision. It becomes a reflex, an inherent part of who you are. Janet, the middle school art teacher, is a great example. She kept talking about opening a summer art studio. After teaching her first small experimental class in her garage, she stopped thinking about it. She simply started referring to herself as the studio lady when she introduced herself.
That shift in language, that internal identity change, makes all subsequent action automatic.
It creates a new level of self-integrity. To be the studio lady, you must teach. To be the writer, you must write. This identity shift must be reinforced by focusing on the inner scoreboard, measuring what you can control.
So we measure process, not prestige.
Focus on controllable metrics. Number of attempts, number of words written, number of cold calls made. These reinforce the identity of a doer regardless of the immediate external results. And we have to understand emotional homeostasis. Rest is not retreat. It is refuel.
How do you ensure rest doesn't invite back the inertia monster?
You schedule the next small action before the rest period begins. You leave a hook in the melody. If you stop writing for the night, you stop mid-sentence. If you finish your workout, you lay out the shoes for the next day. This ensures that when you return, the momentum is still gently pulling you forward.
And finally, the paradox of freedom through structure.
Structure is not restriction. It's the necessary rehearsal of the basics. The scales, the drills, the routines, so that when the creative moment arises or the market shift occurs, your rational energy is preserved for playing the nuance effortlessly. The system becomes the robust foundation upon which spontaneity and brilliance can thrive. #tagoutro.
This has been an incredibly detailed journey, from diagnosing the paralysis caused by the intelligence paradox and the biology of breaks, all the way through to automating execution with the action operating system. We've extracted one simple, essential thesis. Motion beats meditation. The confidence, the clarity, and the perfection you crave do not arrive before you start. They are created by the action itself.
And we have to connect this back to the ultimate cost of inaction. When we review the chief regrets documented by those in hospice care, the pattern is devastatingly clear. They regret not having the courage to live a life true to themselves, defined by their own actions and desires.
That is the real consequence of delay, the unlived life. The elderly stranger's briefcase full of unbuilt ideas is the invoice for that delay.
The law of action is the cure. It challenges you right now to look at that unsent letter, that half-finished project, that idea you've been polishing for 3 years, and recognize that waiting for perfect conditions is time stolen from realization. Use the powerful tools we discussed today, slice until it's stupid, find your 2% action, time box the terror, and leverage the momentum. The distance between the idea and the first immediate step must collapse into zero. That is how you stop planning your life and start rewriting your story.
Thank you for joining us on this essential deep dive. Go make something messy, everyone. We'll see you next time.